You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Kimberly McCreight.
Authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Beware the Chinaman by Stephen Taylor. The future is electric, but who holds the power? Sent by government agent Howard to pick up a stolen hard drive, Danny soon finds himself fighting for his life as he's chased across Europe by the mysterious and deadly Chinaman. The hard drive holds information to expose an organization called the Board, and its chairman wants it back. The Board's plan is to save the planet and gain global dominance through its ecological empire. The execution of the plan is by any means necessary. Beware the Chinaman, the new thriller by Stephen Taylor. Unleashing Iron, Book 3 of the Unwilling Souls series by Gregory D. Little, arrives April 24th and is available for pre-order now. Seslukani has one mission: keep humankind's murderous gods imprisoned. She's about to fail. The gods have achieved the unthinkable, inhabiting human avatars from within their prison's walls. They now gather followers and work to break it open from the outside. One of those avatars is Sessa's own father. Just as all seems lost, Sess learns of a recently unearthed artifact so powerful that it can repair the prison and save her father from the possession that is killing him. But in the wrong hands, the artifact could demolish the prison instead of repairing it, and it's already been stolen. In a desperate race to control the object that will save or end the world, Sess faces a devastating choice as she realizes that no one is immune to the artifact's ancient promise of forgotten power. Not her family, not her friends, not even herself. Unleashing Iron is available for pre-order now. Order before April 24th to get the special sale price. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Kimberly McCreight on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book. It's called A Good Marriage, and this is a book you definitely need on your shelf for your summer reading. Welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Kimberly, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, What is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory of wanting to be a writer was probably rather late compared to a lot of writers. It wasn't until high school. And I wrote my first short story I think it was junior year, English class about Charles Dickens, because we were working on Tale of Two Cities and I could not figure out how to answer an essay question. So to avoid answering said essay question, I instead was like, I will write a short story from the perspective of a young French girl, which is what I did. And then that teacher ended up really encouraging me. And I think when I wrote that story, I just found that there was such freedom in inhabiting characters, and I enjoyed the process so much. But yeah, so that's probably my earliest memory, which I know compared to a lot of writers, it's not that early. But when it finally hit me, it definitely hit hard.
Yeah, well, it's so much fun to hear everyone's individual story, but yeah, we definitely can't compare ourselves to other folks. I had a lady on the show last week who wrote her first book at 85. And, you think you were a late bloomer. That's, it's all perspective.
And that's the great thing about writing is that there is no expiration date. So we can all do it to any age, which is the really great news.
That's exactly right. Were you a bookish kid, Kimberly? Did you read a lot?
I would not describe myself as a particularly bookish kid, which is a source of a bit of self-consciousness on my part, because I know that is true again for a lot of writers. But I did not always walk around with a book in my hand. I do love reading now, but I wouldn't say it was the defining characteristic. I was really kind of outdoors kid. So it wasn't, it's something I again found later in life.
Kimberly, I struggle with dyslexia. I mean, I still do, but there are things that you learn to work around, the daily struggles of dyslexia. But I was not that bookish kid early on either. I did, come into it as I learned to deal with that. But I loved mysteries and, it's mystery movies. I love to hear stories. I love to hear older people talk and talk about, unsolved things, around where I grew up. And, there was that storytelling element was there, even though I didn't feel like I could get that from books early on. Did you have an experience like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I came from a bit of a kind of troubled background as a kid, so I think I definitely found my escape in my imagination. But again, it was more in the stories I made up. So actually, maybe I should go back and amend my earlier answer. But I didn't write those stories down. I remember having an incredibly active imagination as a kid, but it wasn't about writing or reading per se.
Your books. I love the way you write and the way that you unraveled the story for us. I love your style. Do you remember what the first, maybe it was a book, maybe it was a movie, maybe it was a story that you heard that opened your imagination to mysteries and to this idea of thriller stories?
Well, I think that, going back like a long, long time ago, I think I remember Flowers in the Attic being like really just so, I was riveted. And I can barely, I must have read them really young age because I can barely remember the story, but just being like, oh my God, being really riveted by those when I was younger. And, for sure, I was a big horror movie buff as a kid. So I definitely, I've watched every horror movie on the planet. So I can tell you that those were a piece of it. But in terms, I think, of like the structure of my writing, because it's mystery, but I think that the most driving force for me is kind of how the books are put together in a bit of orchestral fashion. There's these multiple pieces. And I remember reading The Sound and the Fury. And that was a real revelation for me, to watch a story come together from different perspectives. And there's really inherent mystery in that, I think. And also a book like The Hours, Michael Cunningham's The Hours, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Or House of Sand and Fog, like I'm thinking of all these books. So for me, I really came to it less from a mystery perspective and more from how is that kind of suspense created when you unfold a story from either that's not chronological or that is from various perspectives. So I was really attached to that, and finding the freedom that there is to tell stories that way. And I do think that just kind of inherently creates mystery when you approach it that way.
Of all the author interviews I've done, I've never heard anyone describe it as orchestral. But I love that because I know exactly what you mean. When you say that, that's such a vivid way of describing storytelling. When you get the idea for a new story that you're going to tell, how does it begin for you? Is it a person? Is it a place? Is it a concept that you start kind of running through possibilities? And how does that orchestral element come into the planning of a new novel?
So the first thing I come to is really like an idea I want to explore. And in this one, it's quite obvious because it's in the title, but really like, what is a good marriage? And so I was really, having been, married a long time myself, I'm really fascinated by that notion. I look around at, other marriages around me, friends we know, and they all seem so different. And so I really was like, are those people happy? What does that mean? And how could you ever know? And I think, obviously there's a lot of stories about the secrets that the husbands and wives keep from each other and kind of the animosity between them. But I think it's interesting, the idea that the secrets couples keep from the world, and not even like in some nefarious intentional way, but just because that's almost the nature of the institution. So anyway, so that was a long answer to that part of your question. But so I come at it from that question first, and then it's kind of like, okay, so like what story am I gonna tell to explore that idea that I'm interested in? And usually what comes next is the characters. And so I think Lizzie, for me, who's the lawyer in this book, came first. Or maybe it might have been Amanda. Like, obviously I knew that something would have happened to her. And I don't outline if you're getting that from this. So I really, like, it wasn't like I sat down and I figured it all out first. I really do just get a spine. I knew like there would be a wife and mother that was dead at the opening. I knew that there would be this party, because that obviously is a piece of this good marriage idea. Like fidelity, I would say, is one of we all take as just like an absolute hallmark of a good marriage, right? So I wanted to play with that idea. If we kind of turn that upside down and say, well, maybe that isn't the only hallmark of a good marriage, or isn't even one of the most important ones. So I knew the party would be there. And so I had really all these pieces. I don't try to work to, and I knew that a bit about the whodunit at the end. Like I know who you will think it is, and I know who it will ultimately be in vague terms. And then I really just kind of sit down and write. And so I work my way into the story. And if it sounds very messy, my process. And that it is. And that really, I wish there was a different process that was more streamlined, but there isn't. That's the only one I have. So I really have to feel my way there. And there's a lot of bad parts about that, but the good part is I really discover the story a bit as a reader might. And I think that allows some of the twists and turns of the story to be organic to the characters. And because I haven't been like, I must do this, I haven't figured it out first. I'm willing to let go of almost anything and let it really unfold as I'm doing it. The really bad part about that is when you're done a first draft, the first draft is kind of a mess because I have to course correct halfway through. I'm like, oh, wait, that's actually a nice person. I thought he was a bad person. He's a nice person. So I'll just kind of change it halfway through, which means I have to go fix it. And usually I do something like 10 or 12 drafts of a book. And by drafts, I mean rewriting almost every word. But once you have, like, I would say my first draft functions like somebody else's outline, right? So like once you have that framework, then there is a certain sense of peace that comes over the process because, I know that I can work with that and it's all there and it's not going anywhere. And so I can start to rip it apart and not feel worried that I'm going to lose the whole thing.
Your debut book, Reconstructing Amelia, was that the first novel that you had written?
No, it was the fifth. So I just started writing book. When I finally decided I wanted to be a writer, I used to be a lawyer. I just kind of wrote my first book. The thing about being a novelist is there's really no way to learn to be a novelist, but to write a book.
Right. Exactly.
It's not really an easier way. So I just wrote that first book. And the really lucky thing that happened to me with that first book, I took a leave of absence from my job, which was also lucky that I was able to do that. It gives you kind of a sense of security. But I got an agent with it and I almost sold it. And because of that, I lived on that for years. And now the books that followed, my next book I finished once I was back at work, and I wrote it in the mornings between like 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. every day. And when I was done, the agent that I had gotten with the first book told me that I should put it away because it was not only sellable, but it was unsalvageable. Oh,
wow.
And it was a really bad book. So he was right. But anyway, so that's the thing. You can kind of like get lucky right away, right? But then you got to do it again. And so as close as I got with the first one, then I stepped back. I wrote that second one and that didn't work. And I attempted something more complicated in the second book that I lacked the skills to execute. So I then stepped back. I did take some like writing classes. At the time I was living in Seattle. So I took some classes at the University of Washington. And so I did spend, so then I got feedback and I started to try to learn how to be a writer. I got a couple short stories published. But then I also wrote 2 more books. And both of those, I think I got agents maybe for both of them, but both of those were rejected too. So all of that took about I think it was a decade. And I had given myself 10 years to kind of chase this dream. At that point I had quit being a lawyer and I had a very generous husband who, despite my hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of law school debt, agreed to kind of support me while I made a go of trying to do this, which is something people should know, because I think people are like, how does anybody, I had somebody helping me financially, essentially. So I think that's really important to know, because it can take a really long time to succeed. So you want to set up, either have a day job that works or something like that. So anyway, by the time I was writing Amelia, I actually had decided that I was done, that I wasn't going to do it anymore. It was now this chasing this dream was making me more unhappy than it was making me happy. And so I was going to give up. But in the meantime, there was the 2008 financial crisis. And so I was like, I'll go back and get a job. But like there were no jobs. So I kept writing Amelia because that's what you do if you're a writer. And I didn't even have interviews. And I finished it because I couldn't find a job. And I did finally, the crazy part of the story is I finally found a job at the University of Pennsylvania Law School working as a writer in their communications department. And I got the job offer 2 days before Amelia went to auction.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so I was able to call, it's crazy. It's like really an unbelievable story. I never got the job offer and my agent was like, no, I think it's really, going to happen this time. And I was like, could I have a couple of days? Think about it. And so I got to call back and they were actually so great because, I knew them and, I had gone to school there and they were excited for me at the University of Pennsylvania. But I got to say, yeah, no, I'm not taking that job. So that was a long-winded answer. But yes, that's
so amazing. Amelia is such an amazing book. It's an interesting premise that it's a who done it, but it's a why done it. It's a how done it. When you're going through that that frustration that this book was birthed out of. Did you have any inkling that this would become the book that launched your career? I mean, you're writing it, you want to give up, but could you sense there was anything special about this book that the other ones that you had tried your hand at just didn't click? Was there? Did it feel different when you were writing it?
Well, I certainly think that you get better over time, right? I think writing is a craft, and so I think there was no comparison between. And by the way, I of course rewrote that extensively before it sold. I pulled out one whole storyline and changed it and did a lot of work on it. And I think writing or any art really is, you have to have this combination of healthy fear, but also this delusional sense that what you're doing is amazing. Because how could you otherwise go on and do it? I think you have to believe that you could be doing this amazing thing. So I did have the sense that it was a much better book. I always think that the last, I think A Good Marriage is the best book I've written because I think you get better. And so, at the time, I think that I had the sense that I had come much closer. I also think as a writer, you're trying to learn not only how to write a book, but how to learn to write the book you're trying to write. So, and my books are really, what I endeavored to do is this combination of, they're definitely mysteries, but they're definitely meant to be about characters and relationships. And those components and issues between people. And that component of the book is meant to be as satisfying as the mystery. And I have always known that's what I'm trying to do. It's very hard to do them simultaneously. So I knew with Amelia that I had gotten, that I finally at least knew that's what I was trying to do. And so I think a lot of those early books were me being like, I think my first book, the one that almost got purchased, it didn't really have an ending. And I was like, no, it's just super literary. And what's funny about that is that's so just idiotic because literary books are wonderful books. And it's not that they don't have it. I wasn't doing that, I thought I was, but in fact, it just was. I can remember there were some agents that passed on at the time, and they were kind of it's not, and they were right. It did, the other half of the book wasn't there. So it just took me a long time to figure that out. So Amelia, I finally knew I had struck the right balance.
I love it. Well, let's fast forward a few years. In the meantime, you've written a couple of other thrillers and a YA series. What was the motivation to write a YA series?
I just really, I didn't think about it as YA versus adult really in particular, except I had an idea for the concept behind the series, heightened emotional intelligence in girls. And what if that was really found to be this great power, and how would the world react? Because often the heightened emotionality of women and girls is viewed as this weakness, right? So we're too sensitive, we're too, emotional, what have you. So I had that idea, and then it's, a little bit about where a book sits, whether it's YA or adult, et cetera, or which genre. I always cross things. My books are never in one clear spot. So it just kind of became clear because none of the characters were adults that it really made more sense for that to be a YA. To me, the book always had 3 chapters. Also, it was always kind of structured as a trilogy in my mind. I say that, and you also know that I hadn't outlined it, which I hadn't. So when I say it was 3 books, it was in my mind 3 books. There was no outline to that effect.
When a new book comes to you, you mentioned earlier that a lot of times there's concepts or themes that you're playing with, and you talked about the idea of what makes a good marriage. I've also been married a long time. My wife and I have been married 26 years this year, and there are many, many ups and downs, and there's so much that goes into what makes a good marriage and what makes a marriage work. When you're thinking about those things and a story starts to take place, at what point did Lizzie come to you and inject herself into your story?
I'm trying to remember. I do think Amanda was first, which is not right. Which is maybe not surprising because she's the more, I don't know, more dramatic, or I guess, portion. I mean, Lizzie ends up being our guide in, and so like I knew that there needed to be somebody from the outside who's seeing this person, who's after the fact, and I needed an outsider to the neighborhood to uncover it. But then all the details, like Lizzie's relationship with Zach, et cetera, came much, much later. And it really is a process of getting to each scene and being like, wait, like, so why is he, so there's a phone call, like in the very first chapter, there's a phone call. Well, okay, so I why is this person called? Why would they call her? And I was like, wait, of course they easily could have gone to law school together. It's a little bit like that. But I will say that I'm sure I started writing that scene with Zach calling her, and I didn't know how they knew each other, and it didn't really matter to me. And it seems so integral now that they knew each other in law school, et cetera. But to get to the heart of their connection, it wasn't essential at the beginning. And I will also say that once I started writing Lizzie, which often happens, and this is when I sound like, again, it sounds really hokey, but the characters do kind of take over, and Lizzie took over the book a little bit. And I thought it was going to be more heavily weighted towards Amanda, but their chapters aren't exactly equally weighted, actually. Like Lizzie has a couple more than Amanda does, or a few more than Amanda does. And she just really was such a strong character. And I felt very grounded in her, that she took on an even bigger role in the book, and the issues in her own life took over a much more important role. And again, that comes from sitting in her character and asking, why is she doing things? Why would she make these choices? And then those end up becoming other threads of the mystery.
Without giving away too much of the story, the catalyst for the story is Zach and Amanda. And I could see where you said that Amanda probably came first, because this is the thing the situation that really kicks off the story and gets us pulled in. But as we see this through Lizzie's eyes, and we're looking at someone else's relationship through the prism of her idyllic life, we start to see the cracks, and we start to realize that she's seeing more of herself as she helps this friend of hers through this situation that they're going through. Is it something that just comes naturally as the story unfolds, that the aspects of Lizzie's life and the cracks in her facade start coming out? Or do you think from the beginning, I can use this to show this in this character? Or is it just, you mentioned earlier that, this character kind of comes alive. Is this a natural progression of figuring out the character's secrets and the things that trouble them? Or do you have some idea of things to come from the beginning?
It's really that thing you said about the process of learning, of coming to know a character. I think other people, again, do this process where what are they called? I don't even know what they're called, but they have like some kind of notes they take. I feel like they're called something, where you have a character and like all their attributes or something.
Right.
I forget what that's called. I don't know what that's called because it actually scares me. It even exists. I refuse to know what that's called. But I feel like people have, do you have like I don't know. I have nothing. I just have me and my computer. So I would say, again, I get to a scene and I'm having them do something, and I'm like, I know they should be doing this. And actually, a good example in A Good Marriage, without giving too much away, Lizzie, after Zach asks for her help, she returns to her law firm, really with the idea in mind that she won't be taking on the case. When she approaches a partner she works with to that effect, to say, well, we can't help him, can we? And in fact, he ends up encouraging her to take on the case. And that's in part, that is why she ends up taking it on. And when he did that, I was like, why would he definitely does that. Like, I know he does that. And he's a relatively minor character, but by the way, like the minor characters are the best, like when you can kind of give them their own story. And I really knew for sure he would do that. And I really am a big believer in listening to whatever my subconscious says, the direction it says the story should go in. And so I kind of put that stake in the ground, and I had to figure out the why. And when you read the book, again, it's a small moment, but it links later in the book, and you do find out there's a why, which actually links more broadly to the themes in the book. But I just kind of put a pin in that. Because you can think, like, I wrote that scene first, and as the reader, you're not going to know the why till later. So I didn't have to figure it all out in that moment. And I generally, the book I'm working on now, my new book, there's all these brackets, like in bold, just like in the middle of a scene, be like, and it says like, figure out why that person is doing that thing. Because I'm like, that's great. That's super surprising. Why would they ever do that? And so I almost kind of end up like seeding those moments first, but then I really challenge myself to come up with a really, really good reason later. Like, I don't just leave them like with it unexplained, because I find that as a reader really unsatisfying. So I really try to make sure everyone's choices are grounded in their character and some authentic sense of the way they would act.
I know people that create character bios for their characters from the beginning and make these character sheets. And again, like you, I don't exactly know what you call that, but I know what it is. And I'm just like you. Like, I don't want to know everything about this character from the beginning. I want them to reveal themselves as they go, and I want their character to be displayed, in their actions and what they do. When you write a book with as many twists and turns as you do, and you're discovering as you go, and you're discovering the characters as you go, have you developed, besides the brackets in the story, a system of tracking things so that you remember where you've twisted people, and or are you just keeping it all in your head as you go?
I do start to keep what becomes an outline, becomes a working outline, and it's usually a series of notes. Like, once I have enough, actually it's in with my new book, it's in my iPhone, in the notes thing, but it's basically a series of bullet points, unrelated, it just becomes a stream of bullet points. But when I'm like, figure this out, figure that out, why would that happen? This part doesn't make sense. Or just some great, what seems to me great at the time, thought about where something could go. And what's interesting is I don't go back and read that until I'm done a draft. And then I can get rid of some will have been, rendered irrelevant. I can kind of clean it up. But it's interesting to be reminded of things. And that almost keeps the process fresh. Because I'm like, oh, I forgot I was going to do that. And then again, because I do think there's this huge power with like the way your subconscious works as you're writing something, I can go back through, and inevitably some part of me will have been putting stuff in to that effect. Like I'll be able to pull those moments together and thread them tighter. I often think of it, my process is like really like lacing up a really tall boot, right? And when I'm doing the first draft, like it's just getting, it's like they're threading outwards, right? And I need to kind of start to pull things together rather than and pull them tighter. And I do that in the revision. But that working document then really does begin to serve me, and it becomes more important as the revision process goes on. And I would say by the time I've rewritten it a couple times and it's becoming what could be a first draft somebody could look at, then I start, I am really kind of using those notes to guide what I'm doing.
As an attorney yourself, how much fun was it to write the legal thriller aspects of the book? And is that something that you had been wanting to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was so much fun. First of all, I felt like I finally got my money's worth, which, like, first of all, that's great. Also, I really did want to write a legal thriller because I think that it would be very difficult to do it if you weren't an attorney, because I was a corporate litigator and I went to a big national law school. So meaning I didn't know anything about criminal law. but I knew enough to know what I didn't know. I mean, I had interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and so I had a little bit of experience, but I knew that I needed an expert. I knew enough to like write the first draft and have placeholders and get what the issues would be. But then I knew to get experts. So I found a criminal defense attorney. And luckily, because I know a lot of lawyers, because I went to law school, I was able to track down, somebody knew somebody who got me a criminal defense attorney who was so generous. He took me to Rikers Island with them and let me sit in, and he'd let me go to hearings with him and explain things to me and the realities of being a defense attorney. And, that part was really helpful. But I will say that I do think that I have always used my legal education in writing the books because of the way they're structured. And I do think that there's something about writing a mystery, at least the way I write them, that is very much like structuring a legal argument like you would in law school, because everything's about now like predict what the other side will say and respond to that in advance. And a little bit what you're doing as a mystery writer is, you put a red herring out or you predict how a reader is going to latch onto that or not, as the case may be, and you have to determine how to respond in advance. So I'm not saying that my readers are my adversaries in any way, but that would be bad. I love my readers, but you are trying to do what a litigator does, which is, and sometimes you've got not great arguments to work with. I mean, the thing about a really complex book is like sometimes you're going to have parts where like you need certain things to happen, and you have to build it up as best you can. You accept that sometimes those are the arguments you've got to work with. Those are the storylines you've got, and so. I think there is that intellectual process is really, I was taught that and it drew me to law school in the first place because I like thinking that way. So it's a bit of a loop. But it was really so much fun to actually write about the law and to be able to do research, about legal issues. So I had a really good time.
Well, the new book is called A Good Marriage. It's out available everywhere today. In this time where we're all locked up in our homes and not going very many places, books have been a saving grace for so many people, and there's nothing like getting lost in a good mystery. Kimberly, if people are just learning about you and want to connect with all the great stuff that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Yeah, my website is a great starting place, which is KimberlyMcCreight.com, and my last name is McCreight. I'm also on Instagram at Kimberly McCreight and on Facebook at McCreight.Kimberly, and on Twitter too at Kim McCreight. So yes, you can easily reach out to me. I love hearing from readers. I actually respond on social media all the time because I think it's fun, and I love talking to book clubs. So if you should definitely reach out to me because I Skype or Zoom or whatever in all the time.
Great. We'll put links to all of that great stuff in the show notes of this episode, as well as there's a link where you can buy the book. Kimberly, this has been so much fun talking. I'm a huge fan. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk.
Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Cleveland, Ohio, 2006. After a chance encounter, 3 people soon find out that life can sometimes thrust us into the public eye, even when taking great measures to avoid it. Cooper Madison was the best pitcher in baseball after being drafted number 1 overall in 1996 from the small Gulf Coast town of Pass Christian, Mississippi. 1 year after announcing his sudden and shocking retirement, he finds himself seeking anonymity in Cleveland, Ohio. Kara Knox is the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. After a tragic work accident to her closest relative, she has built up a tough exterior as she begins her final year of college at Cleveland State University. Jason Knox, Kara's oldest brother, is the lead detective on Cleveland's Edgewater Park killer case. After months without a suspect, he's feeling the heat from his media-hungry chief. Serendipity intervenes, and all 3 learn that perception and reality are paths that rarely ever intersect. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Hey folks, you really ought to check out Patricia Gillam's Heroes of Corvus series. Book 1 is called A Superhero's Duty. A fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the death of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city are not out of danger. A Superhero's Duty, Book 1 of the Heroes of Corvus by Patricia Gillam. Get this series now.